lady in the middle. So we were a little bit worried, will there be anybody left in the audience at this time? But I think it's kind of okay.
Commitment.
Yes, thank you for the commitment. Great to be here. I have a chance to moderate this panel of very distinguished guests. I'll introduce them in a minute. The headline really is about policies and in the policymakers and industry together. How can that fuel and accelerate the scaling up and making Open RAN happen at scale on a global basis? And we've heard earlier today really insightful fireside chats and panels. So no need to kind of repeat what was already said. I think we have a good view of what Open RAN was all about. It was about the flexibility, they drive the innovation, create opportunity to develop more value on top of the connectivity layer. All those great things have been said. The question now is to kind of assess that together with folks who have a little bit of a different angle, maybe not technically deep into the detail, but looking at the more broader societal and economic development. So I have the great pleasure of introducing, starting with Kate Dimsdale, Telecommunications Policy Specialist of NTIA. Great to have you here, Kate. Harald Berninghaus, referent from BMDV, Bundesministerium für Digitales und Verkehr, and also Deputy Director of DK15, which is Technology Förderung, if I remember it right. I found the organization chart on the internet. Harald, great to have you here. And of course, last but not least, Wolfgang Kopf, Senior Vice President, Group Public and Regulatory Affairs of Deutsche Telekom. I hope I got the title right. So we will have a great conversation. And I will start with Harald. Harald representing the German government, who has been, if I understand correctly, the main funder of i14y initially. Now, obviously, we have the industry players involved as well. We have the MOU that was talked about earlier. So really, Harald, why did the German government decide to fund i14y? And are you happy with the results so far?
Yeah, we did 50% of the funding, actually. And the aim was to facilitate the deployment and the evaluation of Open RAN. And that strategy based on actually 3 pillars. The first pillar was early deployments, funding early deployments, one of which them was the O1 town in Neubrandenburg. The other one was in Plauen. The second pillar was the i14y lab, actually. And the third pillar was the funding scheme on innovative network technologies, InnoNT. Okay. And yeah, with the multi-annual framework, financial framework, it comes to, the funding was actually based on the economic recovery package due to the COVID crisis. And it comes to an end at the end of this year. Well, it's planned to have.
And have you got value for the money?
Yeah. Oh, I think so, yes. Expectations were exceeded, I think, because the i14y lab especially gained international reputation. You see the number of international guests here today. We have quite a number of companies. We have 3 network operators, 3 major network operators cooperating within the i14y lab. Mm-hmm. And so far, I think it's a success.
And what would you expect going forward now that the industry is also taking a bit more of the lead? How do you see this in the next year or two? What would you expect to see?
As Open RAN matures and I hope so that we see more deployments. Mm-hmm. And maybe also more companies engaging and testing, and maybe also some operator commitment.
That is a good bridge to Wolfgang. Maybe before you answer Harald's question, Could you reflect a bit from your perspective at the senior management level of Deutsche Telekom Group? How do you see the promise of Open RAN evolving, all the good things we have heard? Where are we on that journey, in your opinion?
Well, if I look back, when did I hear first about Open RAN? I think it was in the context of a GSMA meeting. I was at that time in the board of GSMA 2017 or whatever. And then we discussed internally what we are doing about this potential development. And it was clear that from a technology policy view, we wanted to continue with the successful thing we started back in the, 12 years before, 15 years before with NGMN. After the experience of 3G, it was clear that operators must get much more involved into the next technology. And NGMN was the basis for LTE, and then we built on that also for 5G. And Open RAN was then something which was at the edge, but it was important already from, at least some people told us we should look at it. It got some momentum then due to these vendor discussion, Chinese vendor discussion as well in Europe. But it was only in Germany that people really looked at it at the time. At the European level, we had a Swedish vendor which was fully lobbying against it. Quite successfully, unfortunately. And it was then back in 2019 where we fully embraced the idea as Deutsche Telekom and said we must do something there. And COVID came, and we identified the possibility of getting some funds, of course. We spoke to the colleagues in that ministry and also in the Chancellor's office, and it was quite funny. We are entre nous here. It was the Chancellor's office asking us, how much money do you need? And somebody came to me who did that phone call, and I said, I don't know, ask technology. Well, they are saying it's a mid two-digit sum, and I said, well, in COVID, everything is worth more, so tell them 100 million minimum, So next morning, somebody has misunderstood that. Next morning, in the radio show, I heard, and the government allocated 1 billion to a technology nobody knows. And that was like, oh.
What about 1 0 more? It's just a zero.
You remember, it was 1 billion, and we were like, huh? So that was, but jokes aside, I mean, it was really great how the ministry then helped us implementing Oran Town, the 2 Oran towns, and then this lab. I mean, we were really leading edge then. And I remember then the talks I had in Washington, D.C., also with NTIA, with former boss, now boss. And then we were co-founders, of course, of the Oran Alliance back in 2019. And this was in development which really then took a lot of momentum. The funny thing was in the US, our then CTO didn't like it. He was the typical, sorry to say, telco CTO. I call my vendor if something goes wrong. I would never think about system integrating, but he's history. So even T-Mobile US is now part of that. So we are really very much behind that, and we were at a very early stage behind it. And we still believe in that. And I think what we've done already in Germany is quite advanced. If you look back in 2019, 24 we get the full stack. Okay. But everybody at that time told me it will never happen in 24. I mean, we know how the ups and downs of such a technology development.
Thank you, Wolfgang. I'll come back with some more questions later on, but you made a good bridge back to NTIA and the US. So, Kate, the US government has been very vocal, but also put money on the table, significant numbers as well. Could you share with the audience a little bit, what has been achieved so far? I mean, what's the assessment at this stage of the investments, funding, and of course there's more funding rounds coming, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, after SRS's presentation about how the funding is going to dry up, I have some concerns. Just kidding. Pero, yes, so NTIA, essentially, for those of you that aren't tracking, National Telecoms and Information Administration, the primary kind of advisor to the president, if you will, on all things telecommunications and information policy. We have a lot of interest in supporting telecommunications supplier diversity, in supporting trusted vendors, in supporting the industry-led movement towards kind of open network architectures, which we're also seeing way more now as we're starting to have the conversations around 6G. But I think in terms of what we have to offer, most of y'all may have been here on Tuesday. Julie mentioned it during her presentation, but Brian Gomez, our colleague from the Innovation Fund, talked a little bit about our Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund, the $1.5 billion fund that was put together about 3 years ago or so, to support kind of research and development in the Open RAN ecosystem specifically. And the last round, the second round of our kind of funding opportunity, if you will, just closed, and the Innovation Fund team is going through about like 270 applications.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of applications. And we were looking at only providing $420 million in funding for this round, but we got requests for up to $3 billion. So I think the Innovation Fund is obviously kind of a testament to the support that NTIA provides to the ecosystem, but it's also kind of a show of how important the different players in the ecosystem think that doing R&D and kind of getting into the testing methodologies and figuring out how we can easily replicate things is really quite important.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, the work is still ongoing, right? Let's see what comes out of the 270 applications, and there are additional funding rounds coming up, as we are aware of. So it's exciting times. And that brings me back to Harald. International cooperation. How do you see it from the German government's point of view? Are you working closely with international colleagues on the policy arena, and what do you expect from that, and what do you get out of that cooperation?
Yes, policy discussions are always, international policy discussions are always to gain a common understanding. And taking a look at the US-EU Trade and Technology Council and the vision set out for 6G there, I think the core values of security and energy efficiency, meeting the sustainable development goals is key, I think so. And I think this is the common understanding. We have not been that engaged in Open RAN like the NTIA. However, I think the US-EU TTC is a good base, and quite recently the Draghi report actually came out. And I haven't read the 328 pages on in-depth analysis by now. But taking a close look, or taking a short look, Open RAN was named in there. So I think this is also a good base for discussions for the coming weeks and months. And yeah, to gain a common understanding within the EU and also with international partners.
Yeah, thank you, Harald. And going back to Wolfgang, you touched a little bit upon what it actually requires to embrace an open technology like Open RAN. And we had an earlier conversation where you had some good reflections about what you would expect from the more technical audience and our decision makers. I mean, what can all of the technical folks in the organizations on the operator side do to move forward? What would you expect as representing one of the leading European or even global operators in that sense?
Well, I think if you look at the developments in network technology, I'm not the engineer, but we are heading towards a multi-vendor environment, and I think we must do so. We have no choice, and if you look at what this lab is doing, that's a very critical basic work to make that happen in terms of interoperability and testing. So that's something we, in my view, we really must continue. I know that there, of course, there's already a fight going on different ecosystems. We saw this morning. And that's quite natural. I mean, that's in every technological development. Somebody wants to be the leader and getting a bigger edge of it. There we are. We are waiting, of course, for the developments a little. What can be implemented, but. We are quite ambitious in implementing Open RAN also on a larger scale. I mean, people thought once we had our agreement in Germany on Huawei with the government, we lay back and say, hey, yeah. Nobody lays back, at least not in Deutsche Telekom. Our CEO 2 weeks later explained to the public that we still have the aim of building at least minimum 3,000 sites by 26, again in Brandenburg and north of it. So really integrating that into our commercial network and making big steps also in software development now, which is, I would say, a contribution to the RIC.
Yeah.
So we are investing also heavily in that to be at the forefront. Yeah? And there we are looking for US and European providers to help us. I mean, we are not a software company. Of course, we are doing a lot of internal software development already, but I think it's a big market as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very good, and it's definitely important that a big player like Deutsche Telekom leads the way, and I think we've seen your CEO's announcements, and it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. Kate, we are here at i14y Lab, and the first funding round of NTIA went also to kind of establish lab environments in the US. Could you reflect a little bit on the cooperation and the relevance of working on a global scale between the labs?
Yeah. I think it was Richard this morning that mentioned the kind of AT&T announcements and the Verizon announcements, and I think that is a testament to the Innovation Fund and the work that my colleagues in that office are doing. Essentially, you're seeing a lot more collaboration amongst the different players in the ecosystem. And so with labs like ORCID, I can't remember if it was Richard who mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
ORCID and Accord, I should know what those stand for, but I don't. But I can happily follow up afterwards. But with these kind of consortiums, these labs that are being established and stood up in the United States, I think we've seen a lot more engagement with our international partners like i14y, E3, all over the world essentially. And so I think that's a really important kind of piece to the puzzle, right? As we're looking at building out the Open RAN ecosystem and ensuring that like open network architectures work end to end. I think it's an important piece of the puzzle, as I said, and we have been engaging both with the different labs that have been established, OTICs, the Open Testing Integration Centers, our kind of Innovation Fund supported labs, but we've also been engaging a lot on the policy level, right? Government to government. we spend a lot of time looking at things like the 2021 Prague proposals on telecommunications supplier diversity and kind of trying to promote those principles. And that document is essentially a high-level document that was developed at the Czech Republic's 5G Security Conference in 2021 and essentially lays out a bunch of kind of ideas and thoughts on how governments can kind of helpfully weigh in this industry-led kind of movement. And so things that governments can provide like incentives, appropriate policies that enable these types of approaches, as well as funding for R&D, which I think NTIA has done quite well. But things along those lines. And so engaging with international country governments has also been a key kind of part of NTIA's approach, in addition to kind of engaging with the different labs and the technical folks like in the Institute for Telecom Sciences at NTIA.
Cool. Thank you, Kate. Harald, some reflection I would be keen to hear from your end is that obviously we've talked here about the technology, and very often we talk about radio suppliers and RAN system suppliers, but an open multi-vendor, open RAN ecosystem contains a lot of other opportunities for smaller as well as larger players. Have you, from your perspective in the ministry, responsible also in the area for driving technology forward, do you see something emerging in terms of new players, new entrepreneurs, new potential growing businesses that would be beneficial also for the German industry and the German economy?
Difficult question. We try to do that with the funding on innovative network technologies, actually. We spend a lot of money on adoptions of 5G technology in different fields like agriculture, logistics, manufacturing, and so on. And it was not only Open WAN based, but also Open WAN based. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the strengths, actually. And we've heard it before. Main adopters are actually private networks, right, of Open WAN technology. I hope that innovation that emerges in private networks will spill over to public mobile networks somehow. Yeah. And I think we already have some companies that gained momentum. But, I hope that they will survive.
Right. No, I think there is always a chasm to overcome, but we all hope for that, and we also hope that eventually funding is also still available, because this is a long journey. I think there's one conclusion one can make from today, that we are on a journey, and there is still some way. Coming back to Wolfgang, what going forward now? What are you expecting from policymakers? I mean, you are kind of in between, because you are working with policy, but you do represent an operator, a large operator. What can policymakers do more, except for funding? Is there something else they can do to drive this whole transformation forward? What would that be?
Well, I think I mentioned already the EU level. There's at least a lot of room for improvement to support the whole thing. And there we are working on it, because I think we just had this Draghi report out where there was a lot of talk about how much money is needed to make Europe innovative again. And I think ORAN is a big part of that development. So what we are doing is going now back to the EU Commission as well and saying, hey, you've got to coordinate and organize this on a larger scale. I mean, Germany was a role model. Yeah. Unfortunately, we just talked in the break about it. Germany has some budget restrictions at the moment. Yes. Nevertheless, I think it's important that we continue to fund laboratories like this. But it is at the EU level where we can also lift it to the next level of standardization and making it a more general goal where we get enough momentum then, because only Germany and the US will not make it. Yeah? So I think if you ask me, we need to have really the next digital commissioner and ID commissioners must be behind that and support that. Not only with money, but it's also, we have a lot of standardization bodies. We have security bodies like ENISA, which have to go in and so on. It must be a bigger thing for the future of Europe.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And it's not just about money, it's about showing the direction and enabling things to happen in the right fashion. On that note, Kate, really taking a global view on things. I mean, obviously we talk here about what's happening in Europe and Germany. There's also been visibility on what's happening in the US, but when you look on a broader global scale, what do you see happening and how is the US government engaged in some of those initiatives, if you would like to share some of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think on a global scale, generally, we've seen kind of over the last 2 US administrations, and we've seen kind of this shift towards more telecommunication supplier diversity, advocating for more trusted vendors, as we've seen an approach towards digital infrastructure, towards really critical infrastructure, starting to emerge that's really more kind of authoritarian in style, i.e. that's not like rights respecting, doesn't follow World Trade Organization principles, and obviously this is super meta and high level, but the pandemic, as we've kind of mentioned earlier, really kind of showed how serious these kind of threats to our critical infrastructure are, as we dealt with a lot of issues with our supply chains, and we struggled really to kind of get all of the equipment and the technology that we needed to connect everyone while everyone was at home. And so I think that is something that NTIA and the US government more broadly thinks about quite frequently, how we can continue to promote working together, and countries and companies that kind of have the will and the desire to kind of follow what I've mentioned previously, right? World Trade Organization principles, and that, infrastructure that's rights respecting, that's not going, operators or whomever is managing the infrastructure isn't necessarily going and pulling personally identifiable information, things along those lines. And so that's kind of how we think about engaging globally. And so we're just really looking to support our trusted vendors, our engineers like yourselves developing new open network architecture kind of approaches, and really keeping the market alive. And so some of that engagement, we've definitely been focused on engaging in standards bodies more, especially as we're looking at 6G. We have our 6G vision with the EU TTC, that is essentially a vision that outlines how we're planning to collaborate tangibly with the EU to promote open, secure, and resilient 6G. And obviously, as networks become more and more IT-based, more software-based, and virtualized, there's certainly no doubt that open network architectures will be kind of the prevalent approach for 6G. And then we also engage quite frequently multilaterally with our international partners through groups like the EU TTC, through groups like the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, the Global Coalition on Telecommunications, with our like-minded partners that are really also kind of sharing our values in terms of trying to support industry in delivering on Open RAN. And I think I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Kate. And that was a good summary. And as we are running out of time and the red lights are blinking, I wanted to thank the panelists for giving a good conclusion on all the technical discussions here and how that relates to the bigger picture. I think we are on a great journey, and i14y is well placed to contribute to that journey. So thank you very much.